Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and this podcast is the second of two episodes featuring ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin in conversation with journalist Mike Eckel.
Anything that goes to raise doubt in a person's mind about how the integrity of the electoral system, then you could say that is working towards the end of the Kremlin's goals.
In today's conversation, we'll be speaking with Mike about the threat horizon, including attacks from nation-states, and where companies and individuals are particularly threatened. Steve resumes the conversation with Mike, talking about the Russian interference into election integrity.
Certainly, cyber is able to be used as a particular tool, one of many tools, but also I think just the very fact that it has happened in certain parts of the world then raises the question of whether it will happen here. What I mean by that is I was talking not so long ago to a German politician who had expressed concern at the time of the German elections that the Russians may have been trying to influence that. And certainly there was no evidence that that was the case. But the very fact that they were concerned about it really diverted a lot of attention and a lot of resource away from what they would have done otherwise in order to assess whether or not there had been any attempts to meddle or to influence and so on. And I suppose that's already achieving part of the objective of upsetting the apple cart, if you like, within any kind of Western democracy. The fact that we have to be concerned about some of those things would be achieving part of the objective?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. If there's any sort of question or doubt or uncertainty in anyone's minds about, were those votes counted properly in Ohio? Were those in 2016 or in the recent congressional elections here in the United States? What were the messages being spread on social media? Anything that goes to raise doubt in a person's mind about how the integrity of the electoral system, then you could say that is working towards the end of the Kremlin's goals. The flip side of that, though, is also just this awareness, there's a prophylactic aspect to it, that people are sort of now aware that, hey, this meme that shows up on my Facebook feed saying, lock her up, Hillary's a crook, that may be simply a meme that was created by a bunch of Russian dudes sitting behind a computer in St. Petersburg and bought through Facebook's platforms. And so there's sort of a media literacy aspect to it, I think, that people maybe are more attuned to this than they were. Certainly where the platforms are concerned, we know this for a fact. I mean, the news that Facebook has been, bombarded with in recent weeks, that they were just blissfully ignorant or woefully ignorant about the breadth of the efforts by the Russians to use Facebook as a platform to spread confusion and discord. And, that's a story that's going to be going on for some time now, and they may have legal troubles down the road. But I think the awareness of it, that serves a purpose. And I think I would argue that's a good thing, that people are cognizant of that. Now, whether that then also feeds into the distrust and lack of faith in the electoral process, that's a longer term discussion. Look what's happened in the United States since the 2016 election. The congressional elections that happened in November 2018, I haven't seen any real discussion about, election manipulation or the results were falsified, or that there were these, Russian-influenced dirty tricks that went on, and that the questions of the results, the Democrats taking the House and the Republicans holding the Senate, should be in doubt. And in fact, cyber researchers, private companies that have tracked this stuff for years have said that the Russians appear to have sat out the run up to the November midterm elections for reasons that aren't fully clear. So I think the discussion is still ongoing about is the integrity of the United States electoral system in question, or has it been fatally undermined for all time? I don't think it has been, and I think it'll take a couple more election cycles before we get sort of a larger, society-wide consensus that, things were bad in 2016, but, we've shored up our defenses and people have not lost all faith in the American electoral system.
I mean, we're talking very much at the sort of political level. Let's drop it down a level or two. As a business leader, let's say of an organization that is heavily involved in critical national infrastructure, let's say a bank or a manufacturing organization, electricity, power generation, something like that. Should I be worried?
Yes. I think you should be worried. To put it another way, you should be concerned. And if you haven't been up until now, then that should be even more concerning, because that means you're very, very late to the game as far as how these cyber actors are operating. In terms of how malware is being implanted in critical infrastructure like the electrical grid or dams, for example, we know that's happened. That's been talked about publicly, and in classified settings. And there is a slow realization, again, I'm talking about in the United States, I can't speak for other places, that there needs to be a internal response about how to isolate the malware, how to investigate how deep it is burrowed into a system. And then there's also the question of how do you respond to it. That's a question not necessarily for a private company, but for a government. But I think, yes, companies should be concerned. I don't think people need to start panicking and, unplugging every computer from their Ethernet and going back to ticker tapes and Post-it notes and telegrams. But I think people need to recognize that private companies need to invest in it. You're not, whether you're, JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America or Facebook, or you're, the mom and pop store that sells stuff through Amazon or eBay around the corner. I mean, you're at risk, and I think people should invest accordingly. Yes, does the mom and pop store need to go out and invest in, in massive extra server space and, firewall protection and active defense hacking measures? No, they don't, but they need to make that a part of their routine capital investments. And obviously for big companies, I mean, it's imperative. I mean, companies have been burned, Again, I mentioned JP Morgan and Bank of America. It was 2014 that they were targeted by Chinese hackers. I know for a fact that all Fortune 500 companies are shifting massive resources into things like server protections and firewalls and things like, active defense hacking. As I was coming up to New York, I read this long article in the New Yorker from the summer about this debate of whether companies should be allowed to hack back against either private entities or even public entities. And currently under U.S. law, it's illegal for a private company. Like if you're a computer company, you find a hacker in your system and you can sort of identify where he or she came from, it's illegal for you as a private entity to then go after that person and then try to infiltrate that person's computers or steal data from them or whatever. And there's been discussion about tweaking U.S. legislation to try and allow private companies to do something more than just sit on their heels and call up the FBI and say, hey, we've been hacked. Because, the FBI has limited resources, too, to go after all the, nefarious cyber activities that goes on in the private sector. So, yes, private companies should be concerned that you should be making reasonable investments in your cyber profile, in your own infrastructure. But I think doing it preemptively rather than waiting and discovering that your bank accounts have been emptied or your servers have been linked up to a massive botnet that's mining bitcoins and using those bitcoins to funnel money to Russian hackers. I mean, these things do happen. I think, being cognizant of this and doing something now instead of waiting until you're targeted, that makes all the sense in the world.
I think one of the things at the ISF we've recently produced certainly some guidance on running cybersecurity threat exercises. So playing out different scenarios, making sure that your playbook is in place before some of these things might happen. But one of the elements in there that I want to pick up in what you've just been saying is the challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations, for a lot of chief information security officers, is conveying the message to particularly, say, the board around this appropriate response. What is an appropriate amount of investment? What is an appropriate amount of resource required to be put in place? And certainly, I think some people might be listening to this thinking, well, if the Russian state is coming after me, what chance do I stand as an organization? There's no way that I can bring to bear the resource required, surely, to make myself look unattractive to them. So what are your thoughts around those sorts
Well,
of
I mean, that's true. I mean, if you're targeted by the GRU, then maybe the best thing to do is just unplug everything from your servers and go back to pen and paper and old, what were those smelly purple linotype copier machines that used to, what were those called? I mean, that was, the Russian, when I was living in Russia in the 90s, people were still using carbon paper there weren't really Xerox machines and certainly computer printers were nowhere to be found, at least among the general populace, and people were still using carbon paper and reusing carbon paper and over and over and over again. That is no longer the case. I can tell you that with great certainty. So, yes, I mean, each situation is different. It's hard to make a general observation across the board. Again, I'm not a cyber researcher. I'm not an IT person. I just write about it for my work. But I know for a fact that there are very simple things you can do as a company just to encourage, I think it's called good cyber hygiene. Things like two-factor authentication and drilling home to your employees that, you don't just willy-nilly click on something, some random link, because somebody you may have heard of sent it to you. They're sort of basic things that I think societally we're getting to that point where people understand that this is a norm, just like you get into your car, you put the keys in the ignition, and then you check your mirrors before backing out. People are getting to the point where they know that, hey, two-factor authentication is a good thing. Hey, I shouldn't be using password 12345 on every single social media account and every single computer account that I have in my home or my office. I mean, those are sort of simple, general, non-capital intensive investments that companies can make. And then the question becomes a question of scale and the dangers that you're facing. Again, the organization I work for, Radio Free Europe, is a persistent target of hackers, Russian first and foremost, just by virtue of where we report and broadcast and publish. And so it's certainly a running battle to stay ahead of the people that are looking to inject their malware into our systems and extract everyone's address book and contacts and emails and whatnot. So, again, the message I think would be is there are some really simple, easy cyber hygiene things that companies can do, small and large, that aren't difficult, and people should be doing them anyways, just as a matter of routine, given, in the year 2018, 2019. And then beyond that, it's a question of servers and firewalls and antivirus software and, threat surveillance tools, which would require more of an investment.
That was the second and last of our two-part conversation series with journalist Mike Eckel. We'll be back again soon with another conversation with a business leader, a cybersecurity expert, or possibly a surprise guest. In the meantime, if there's someone you'd like us to interview or a topic you'd like to hear covered, please get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. And don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it because it helps new listeners find us. Until we're back with you, to find more resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit us at securityforum.org.